All right. How's everyone doing out there? Thanks for tuning in to our Giving Tuesday live stream here, Wildlife Conservation on the Seacoast. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. My name is Brian, and I'm here with Ashley Stokes.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Ashley is the director of our Marine Mammal Rescue Program, and I work as the Community Outreach Manager. We're the two full-time staff that work this is what we do all day, every day is Marine Mammal Rescue. And yeah, this Giving Tuesday, we have some pretty cool announcements to make so far. We have through the day, our goal has been to reach 130 different people out there in our community to support this work, representing the 130 different marine mammals that we've responded to this year. And so far, we have 64 different donors that have helped us raise $7,878 in support of our Marine Mammal Rescue Program. Ashley, I mean, that's awesome, right?
That's amazing. Yeah. Thank you all so much.
Seriously, thank you all. We could not do the work that we do every single day, responding to seals, whales, dolphins, porpoises, our local marine mammal species, without the help of you, our local community, acting as our eyes on the water and helping us financially to support us. Because Ashley, you say it all the time. I mean, seals can't pay for the work themselves, right? This is
unfortunately not. Maybe someday they'll adapt to be able to carry it.
They rely on us. They rely on you, and you all are stepping up huge. So we're actually, I will mention, we are $2,100 away from reaching $10,000 raised today. So we're still, Giving Tuesday isn't over yet. If you or your friends or anyone that you know wants to give and support our work, you can click on the link that is in the description of this post. So we're gonna dive right in. Ashley, are you ready to talk all about this year?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, it's been a wild year, wild ride for us. So we're gonna start off. We're gonna explain the entire season here. We're gonna explain all about those 130 different animals that we've responded to. And I want to start with this graphic here. So this graphic, Ashley, if you want to dive in and kind of explain what our viewers are looking at here.
Sure. So this just gives all of you watching this evening an idea of what a typical year looks like for us. So this bar graph is broken down by year, with 2014 being our inaugural year, if you will, for the year that we started our program. And then further than that, it's broken down by species. So if you look at the top of the graph, PP is harbor porpoise. We also have some other cetaceans that we've responded to, but harbor porpoise is the most common that we respond to. And cetaceans only encompass about 5% of our general workload or caseload. CC is the hooded seal, so one of our winter species. PG is the other of our wintering species, the harp seal. HG is the gray seal. And then PV is our most commonly seen seal species here in our response territory, and that's the harbor seal. So you'll notice a few unique things on this bar graph, the first being 2018. You may look at that and say, wow, why did they have such an influx of animals? So in general, we usually will respond to about 110 cases per year. But that year, we rounded out the year at 298. And the reason for that is the summer of 2018, an unusual mortality event was declared, or a UME for short. And basically, that means that there was a die-off of seals in the area. And that was throughout our entire response territory of New Hampshire and Northern Mass, but also spanned further down south into Massachusetts, but also further north to our colleagues in Maine. And the findings of that unusual mortality event was a virus called phocine distemper virus. So that's something that since that unusual mortality event, we've been keeping a close eye on disease surveillance. So you may see us swabbing animals, similar to, you or I getting a COVID swab. We swab different areas of the animal to look for disease in these animals, both phocine distemper virus and other things like avian influenza. And there's also research now going on for COVID as well. So that was why 2018 stands out. And then you may notice 2020 was a pretty quiet year, with 2014 being a quiet year as well, but we hadn't publicized the hotline yet. So with 2020, the likely reason behind that is COVID. Through the summertime, May through about the end of July, the beaches in New Hampshire were completely closed. You literally could not go down onto the sand. There were barricades set up, but that, quite honestly, might have been a blessing in disguise for our animals out there, because they weren't getting the harassment that they may sometimes otherwise get. Even just as simple as somebody going down to take a photo can impact, their well-being and cause them to act in ways that they maybe normally wouldn't, and causes them undue stress. So that's likely why we had a dip in cases in 2020, because we rely on the public to call these animals into us. So if there aren't people on the beaches, they're not calling them into us. So that's not to say animals weren't there, they just likely weren't being observed. And then in 2021, we currently stand at 130 animals. So again, our average generally is about 110 to 115. So we're very slightly above average, but nothing extremely out of the ordinary. But you'll notice the last few years, those red bars, we've been seeing a little bit of an uptick in gray seals, which we don't see quite as often as harbor seals, but it's an interesting trend to look at. We've been seeing gray seals that still have what we call lanugo, or birth fur, a birth coat. And generally, they will shed that once they have weaned from mom, but we've been seeing a lot of those animals with lanugo. So it's, there could be some gray seal pupping going on around here where we didn't think that it was happening. So it's something that our team is trying to keep an eye on, which is why it's really important for all of these animals, live and deceased, to be called into our hotline.
Yeah, those are awesome points. Really interesting to break down the data. And yeah, so we'll come back to that graph too. But the next bit that we want to talk about for this year we're going to actually talk about Greek gods and goddesses. Actually, we're gonna switch things up from seals. It all comes back full circle. This year's theme at our partner rehabilitation facility, National Marine Life Center, was Greek gods and goddesses. And so anytime that we had an animal that needed to be rehabilitated, we would bring them there and they would be designated a name. So we're going to dive into a few of those. Our first one being Apollo.
Yes.
Here's a little Apollo here for you. So Ashley, if you want to tell them a little bit about the story of Apollo.
Sure. So for each of these animals, it will start with a photo just like this one, of the day that we rescued the animal and then when the animal was released from rehabilitation. So just to give you a little bit of a backstory on Apollo, he was rescued from Newcastle in New Hampshire, right down the street from the Seacoast Science Center, in March. The reasons why we picked the animal up, you can probably tell in that top photo, that's not a healthy weight for these animals. So you can see those hip bones protruding. He is exhibiting a relatively normal posture. So we like to have these animals keeping their head and their hind flippers elevated off whatever surface they're on, whether it be sand or rocks. So he was mostly doing that, but the likely reason for that is the tide was coming up and washing around him. So otherwise his face would have been under the water. But he was really thin. He was his weight was 18.8. We do it in kilograms. So for those of you that pounds is easier, that's about 41 pounds.
Yeah. And I have some footage here I'll pull up too.
The other things that we were looking at with him is he had a really high sodium level and he had a really low glucose or blood sugar level. So those were all kind of alarming things for us. So we did pick that animal up. Luckily, there was space in rehabilitation, which there isn't always. We actually held that animal overnight at the Science Center because a couple of his blood values were so alarming. We wanted to give him some time to settle in, let the stress wear off a little bit, and see if he was truly a rehabilitation candidate. So driving these animals an hour and a half south to get to rehabilitation is stressful on them. So we want to give them the best chance that we can. And we're able to give them some fluids to help with that, give them some glucose or some sugars if their sugar levels are low. With ice seals, which this is a harp seal juvenile, with ice seals, they're used to eating ice and snow to stay hydrated. So we're able to offer that to them as well to help get their hydration levels back up a bit.
Yeah.
So this animal was actually released the end of April, and he was weighing in at 73 pounds or 33.2 kilograms. So he gained a lot of weight in a short amount of time. But in addition to what we observed in the field, he was diagnosed with verminous pneumonia, lungworms in both lungs, as well as a host of many other parasites.
Yeah. So that's just our first one. That was Apollo. Now we're going to bring up Hydra here. This one, he's giving you that little side eye look that harp seals quite often give. It's almost like they're really just annoyed with you when we approach them as marine mammal responders. But Ashley, if you want to explain a little bit about Hydra's story here.
Sure. So I just mentioned that we look for that banana posture, or keeping their head and their hind flippers elevated. That's how they thermoregulate. So they should keep their front flippers tucked into their body, head and tail up. So you can see in this top photo, this animal is not doing that. So we would call that a flat posture. So the animal is lying completely flat. He does still have his front flippers tucked for the most part, so that's pretty good. But overall, this animal was extremely lethargic. Another thing that harp seals especially, which this is another juvenile harp seal, when they get stressed out or they're not feeling well, they'll actually eat sand or rocks or whatever substrate is in front of them at the time. And with young animals, they'll sometimes simply confuse sand, thinking that it's snow or ice. So this animal was also eating sand. You can imagine eating sand and rocks is not a good thing for their GI tract, so it can very quickly lead to impaction, which can be fatal for these animals. So we monitored that really closely. However, rehab was not initially available for this animal the day that he stranded in March. He was on Plum Island in Newbury, Massachusetts. So we set up our safety perimeter. We put signs up. We had volunteers and staff out there monitoring the animal so that people didn't further stress him out. And luckily, the next morning, he was still there. He still looked poorly, but a spot had opened up in rehabilitation. So we were able, initially we couldn't pick him up and get him to a rehab, but a spot opened up. We were able to pick him up. He was diagnosed with having parasites, severe dehydration, wounds on his body, and also the sand ingestion, which they wanted to keep a close eye on. But he too was released alongside Apollo the end of April.
Nice. Yeah. Another good story, another harp seal. So now we're moving on to Odysseus here. This is another harp with a slightly different story.
A little bit different. So this animal is another harp seal. Just to round out the harp seals for us. So again, it's a species of seal that we generally only see in the colder winter months. So this animal too was responded to in March on Hampton Beach, right on the main stretch of beach. So for those of you that know the area, it's a very busy area. So not a great spot for him to be in to begin with. You'll also notice, even to the untrained eye, you can probably look at that top photo and say, something just doesn't quite seem right. But overall, he was pretty bright. He was pretty alert, very responsive. So nothing extremely concerning. So oftentimes what we'll do with these animals, because it's natural for them to haul out of the water, is to give them some time and observe them over time. So we put this animal on what we consider a 24-hour watch so that we can kind of monitor his health, see if he's improving or declining, and what might be going on. So again, we set up a safety perimeter for that animal and left him overnight with signage with the intention to head back out first thing in the morning and check him out and see how things are progressing. Unfortunately, the following morning, well-intentioned people on the beach thought he needed help, ignored the signs on the perimeter, and actually went up to the animal with a very heavy quilt and wrapped the animal up in the blanket. So that's what we consider human interaction. So it's against federal regulation to approach these animals unless permitted to do so. So unfortunately for him, immediately after that, he began essentially binge eating sand. It was just constant. So we were able to pick that animal up. We wanted to get a better observation of him off the beach and do a full external exam complete with blood work. So we found out that animal was actually in pretty rough shape, and the amount of sand that he ingested was very concerning. He also ended up having a swollen right front flipper. It's possible it was there before we didn't notice it, but it's also possible that it was a result of the human interaction. So we were able to get him into rehabilitation as well, and he was released with the other 2 harp seals.
Yeah, nice. And so the next animal that we have here is probably one of the weirdest, most interesting stories. I learned something new from it. So this next one was named Griffin. All right. And the story behind this one is just mind blowing. And it revealed something about gray seals that I never personally knew. Ashley, you want to break the news? I have some other cool pictures to share too.
Sure. So you'll notice this animal's pelage, or its coat, looks very different than the last 3. And that's because this animal is a young gray seal. So this is one of the 2 year-round species of seal that we see around here in our territory. And this animal was actually responded to literally right outside the Science Center in Odiorn State Park.
Yeah, I think our aquarist Sean actually reported the animal with his group. I think it was his teen fellows that were here.
Yes.
So really
and again,
wild.
You'll look at that top photo, and even if you don't do this as your line of work every day, you can probably look at that and figure out that he's not feeling the greatest.
Mm-hmm.
So he was really quiet. He had crusty eyes, excessive salivating, so he was drooling constantly. Overall, just very lethargic, and he steeply declined throughout the day. So he was moving around a bit, but as the day went on, it was just worse and worse. He wasn't really reactive to people. This is what gray seals should look like when you approach them. So this is actually the next morning in the kennel when he was feeling a little bit better because he had gotten some fluid treatment and some glucose, and he was able to rest in the kennel quietly overnight.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing we found in the kennel or in his enclosure the following morning was nothing but feathers.
A lot of feathers.
This photo was down at rehabilitation, but it looked very similar in the crate. And the animal had defecated, but it was literally all feathers. And then this photo from National Marine Life Center was vomit. So he had essentially thrown up all of these feathers. So you probably think of seals as eating only animals in the water, down in the ocean, in the water column, whether it be fish or crustaceans. But they will actually eat birds and ducks as well. That was the first for me to see that many feathers.
This was the first time you've ever witnessed something like this, right?
We had a harp seal the previous year that we didn't witness, but went to rehabilitation and had passed feathers as well, but nothing to this extent. So this was a lot.
Yeah, I'll take the feathers off the screen. But it's a very interesting finding, and it's how it kind of shows that we're constantly experiencing new things during these responses. So never a dull moment. You never know what you're going to find.
So he actually ended up having a food aversion in rehabilitation. So he was reluctant to eat. But he also had influenza A as well. So the flu.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to move on to Chiron. I think that's the right way to say it. I'm not sure which Greek mythological creature Chiron is named after, but another gray seal here. And Ashley, I have some footage too from this release that I'll share in a second as well.
Yeah, so these before and after photos just kind of give you a glimpse in what this conservation work can do. So these are animals. We try not to pick them up if it's not clear that they're not going to otherwise survive. And they're not going to all survive. So there are animals that we respond to. They die while we're in the field, or they die while we're, collecting them off the beach. And those things happen. We can't save them all. We're not meant to save them all. But for those animals that are suffering, animal welfare comes into play. So we're able to step in and get these animals some care. Unfortunately, sometimes it's also humane euthanasia. But for these animals, Chiron was responded to in April. So he's another young gray seal. And he was rescued off of Salisbury Beach down in Salisbury, Mass. Again, really quiet. He was laying flat, which was concerning, but he was also lying with his flippers in the front, completely out to the side. So I mentioned that they should keep them tucked into their body to assist with thermoregulation. They do move them out to the sides when they're moving around on the beach, like you see here at his release. They do use them to move around. But when they're resting, they should be tucked into their sides. And he was resting completely flat with his flippers out to the sides all the time. He was responded to later in the day. So again, we come back to that monitoring. He didn't look extremely poor. So we wanted to give him a little bit of time to see if he would bounce back, if maybe he was just really tired. But the next day, he was still really quiet, really lethargic. So we decided to at least get a health exam on him and see what his blood work showed. And maybe it was going to just be a simple relocation to a quiet beach, which is another option we have. But unfortunately, his glucose level was extremely low. His oxygen saturation, so you may have been hearing a lot about that, especially with COVID, that they look very closely at oxygen saturation. We look at that in animals as well. So that indicated that he had at least an upper respiratory infection going on. But once he was admitted to rehabilitation, in addition to that, he had really low body temperature that he wasn't controlling well either because he was so thin. So you can see his hip bones there. Yeah. But he was diagnosed with severe pneumonia and lungworm. So his lungs were working really, really hard just to get that minimal oxygen saturation. Yeah. But he was released end of May. So yeah.
As you saw in that video. And no, it's and very, very cool stuff. And now we're actually going to pivot here to Zeus, who this one is a little harbor seal pup. So we're shifting species again. And as you can kind of tell, as the year goes by and the seasons change, the species that we respond to do change as well. So this is little Zeus.
Yeah. So this kind of gives you an indication of kind of the seasonality of our work. So you notice, the first 3 animals towards the beginning of the year that we picked up and brought to rehabilitation. We were responding to other live and dead animals in between all of those, but they were harp seals. So those were the winter months. Then we got into our gray seal, young of the year animals. And then we get into these guys, the harbor seals. So he was responded to the very beginning of June in Rye, New Hampshire. And he was likely still a dependent pup, meaning that he was still dependent on his mom. They're only with mom 3 to 4 weeks, and then they're completely on their own. So you can see it looks like he's swimming away. He's actually just in a tide pool. So he was likely trying to cool his body down a little bit. So we were able to pick him up. You may have noticed in that video that the side of his face was extremely swollen. So we wanted to get a better look at that. And sure enough, it was severe infection. So he had a wound there that had gotten extremely infected and had basically created an abscess that was full of infection or pus. So we were able to drain some of that out. You can see it very clearly there, but the infection was pretty severe. And that may actually be why he was possibly abandoned by mom. So he was also really thin. So he was likely on his own for a little bit, trying to kind of figure out life on his own without mom, but wasn't doing a great job. So he was given a full health check with the main finding or clinical observation being that facial wound. So you can see it very clearly there.
Yeah.
So we checked on his blood work. He was also found once he got into rehab, in addition to the facial abscess, to have ingested pebbles. So that's likely a result of where he was stranded. He was probably searching around for food, even though normally he would still nurse from mom. He was also emaciated, and he had enteritis, which is swelling of the intestines, both large and small, which is likely a result of viral or bacterial infection. So you can see that wound there. We just cleaned it out a bit, applied some antibiotic, and then got him down to rehabilitation. And he was released the very end of July of this year.
Yeah. So another good story. And again, these are all the stories of animals that successfully we've been able to respond to and send to rehab. So of the 130 that we've responded to this year, 9 of them fit that criteria. So we're gonna move on to one more of them here. We got this one's Hercules. So Hercules, another harbor seal. And after this, we're gonna dive into a few of the interesting trends we've been talking about this entire time.
Yeah, so Hercules, so if you keep in mind our response territory, I may have mentioned this earlier, is all of New Hampshire and then northern Massachusetts from the Mass-New Hampshire border down to Essex, Massachusetts, which is basically just south of Crane Beach. But this animal was actually in Gloucester. So you may say, wait a minute, that's not your response territory. And you'd be correct. That is what we consider a gap in coverage territory, meaning that there isn't an organization responsible for it. So it does fall on NOAA Fisheries, who actually issues our permits to do this work, or our stranding agreements. But they don't have the staff to send out to the beach to respond to these animals. So for that area, because it's pretty close to our territory and we actually have a volunteer that lives there, we've let them know that for those animals kind of in the Cape Ann area, that we are willing to help respond as long as we have the resources and staff to do it. So we did respond to this animal. It was in Lanes Cove in June. And this was another human interaction case, unfortunately. So when we got there, there was a large group of people around it. It was really high up on the rocks, right next to some private homes. And again, people meant well. But a gentleman out there said, when I went up and I poured water on it, it didn't seem to really like that. It didn't respond very well. So that's when we knew for sure that it was human interaction. This animal too was really thin and resting really flat. And it was also still vocalizing, indicating that it was either newly weaned from mom or was still a dependent pup. So there is that transition period where it's a bit tough to tell what it is. But being really emaciated, if this animal was still successfully nursing from mom, it would be nice and plump.
Yeah.
This animal too had an extremely low glucose of only 67. They should be up in at least the 110 to 120 range, and had a really high fever. So we were able to get that animal into care, and he too, he was only given a body score in rehab of 2 out of 5. So that lets you know just how emaciated he was. And he too was released the end of July.
Yeah, I know that. Well, I mean, thankfully we were able to get out there, respond to that animal, and bring them to our partners. I will just show real quick the last one. This one was Achilles. I had to. Achilles is such a cute one. Also, by coincidence, most of the animals that we responded to and were able to bring to rehab were male seals. So our friends down at National Marine Life Center were joking that we took all the good names of the gods, and there were so many other goddesses that hadn't had their names pulled. So pretty interesting. But Ashley, if you want to real quick just jump into this, and then we'll talk about a couple other stories we have for you.
Yeah, so this animal, I mean, the photo pretty much tells the story. It's night and day from, the time we picked that animal up in the top photo to its release in the bottom photo. But he was collected from Plum Island Beach in Newberry. And this was an animal that truly showed how resilient these animals can be. We held this animal overnight because it was not stable enough for transport. He had a body temp of 103. So they're very similar to us. So 103 to us is alarming. So it's alarming to them as well. Really rapid breathing, just didn't really respond to us a whole lot, even in the kennel when they should get really nervous. So we held him overnight because, quite frankly, we just weren't confident that he was going to survive the night. So we wanted to give him some time to settle down. We gave him some fluids. We beefed up his glucose or sugar levels to try to kind of help give him a little bit more fight. And the next morning, he looked a lot better. But he was not using his right front flipper at all. His umbilicus or his belly button was really swollen and infected. So we still brought him down to rehabilitation, and he was released end of August.
Yeah. So his flipper was his Achilles heel, technically speaking.
It was.
So with that, those are a few of those feel good stories. So unfortunately, we did actually pretty recently we have it's not all sunshine and rainbows when it comes to marine mammal rescue. And we do about half of the animals that we respond to are deceased by the time we get there. But recently we've had a very interesting response to a common dolphin that stranded while it was alive in Hampton Beach. So very crowded area. A lot of people frequent this place. And I'm going to pull up some pictures here. A lot of you may have heard about this, but we're here to break it down for you a little bit further. So I'm gonna pull up the first picture here, which really, so the first thing that happened was the public, you all called this animal in. Someone walking on the beach called this animal in. And that allowed us to initiate our response, get down there. And the first thing that we do is we take photos and we assess the situation. So we're not just standing around talking to each other. Ashley is actively calling partners in our network who regularly deal with live stranded dolphins to gauge realistically what this animal's condition looks like. What should our steps be to move forward? Because sometimes the best thing isn't always to put the animal back in the water. So that's what you really see there. Here's kind of the second step of this process. Ashley, if you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing here.
Sure. So you may wonder in that first photo, especially, those people that were on the beach that day that were watching, all of this happen in real time, you might be wondering, well, why didn't they just immediately upright the animal? Dolphins, common dolphins especially, which is what this animal is here. This was an adult female. They do not respond well to stress. So the fewer times you have to physically touch the animal, the better. So we didn't want to move in right next to the animal and upright her until we were ready to do so, had consulted the veterinarians, and had a plan in place. Yep. So here we were uprighting her so that she could breathe a little bit easier. She was in a more natural position, and she was in a better position for us to move in with the dolphin sling or the dolphin stretcher, which is really soft, has some holes for her front or pectoral flippers. And we were able to pick that animal up. We did first attempt to release her at the beach site. Externally, everything she was exhibiting was normal behavior. Her breathing, her responses. She passed fecal on the beach, which looked normal. So everything indicated that we should try to release her. She was good body weight. But as you can see in this photo, this was the remnants of the nor'easter. So it was very dangerous out there on the beachfront. So we had decided, in consultation with our vet and network partners, especially at International Fund for Animal Welfare on the Cape, that we would attempt this one time because it was simply not safe for our responders. They couldn't stay in the water with the animal to assist her. They essentially had to release and get out of the water and then see what happened.
And I can absolutely attest for that. The waves were pounding us. Mm-hmm. I know it was definitely a dangerous situation. And as soon as we were right there in the water, in chest deep water, the waves were coming. You had to duck underneath them to try and keep that animal in one place and not falling off of that sling. So it was pretty crazy conditions out there. The place that we ended up bringing this animal afterwards was a nearby cove. And the water was much, much more reasonable there. No, there wasn't, all these big 6-foot plus waves breaking right on you. And we were able to refloat that animal. And it was listing to the side a little bit, Ashley. And it did end up making its way out towards the mouth of the of the ocean there. But if you want to tell them about kind of what ended up happening. It's pretty sad story, but a reality that we have to deal with.
Yeah, so we were able to successfully refloat her the second time, and we stood in the water with her for, I'd say, 5 to 7 minutes initially, because it does take them some time to get their bearings back and realize they're back in the water. So what we look for is the flukes, or the tail, and the peduncle, where the tail meets the body, where all of their muscles are concentrated, which makes them such powerful swimmers. We wait for them to start really thrusting that tail to show us that they're trying to swim on their own. So over time, we just kind of slowly let go, let her show us that she's trying to swim. And we were able to successfully refloat her. As Brian mentioned, she was listing a little bit to one side. It's likely that she had a partially collapsed lung, which they can recover from pretty quickly, but it does make it pretty heavy. So that's likely, that and being disoriented from being stranded, which we think was actually overnight, given the tides. Luckily, that animal was able to swim away. She swam successfully over the next almost 2 hours. And then we got a call on our hotline from a resident that lives right on the harbor in Hampton. Unfortunately, the tide was going out, and there's it's almost like a little cove that's very tidal, that the water essentially drains almost completely out of on a normal tide. And as the tide was dropping, she was successfully swimming in and out of the cove towards the mouth of the ocean. But then she had gotten stuck kind of on top of some rocks as the tide was going out, and the waves by the mouth of the ocean, we mentioned on the face of the ocean, right on the beachfront, how big they were. So they were pretty big by the mouth as well. So those were coming into the harbor a bit because she had successfully made it out there. But as the tide dropped out, she actually rolled into a rocky crevice, which was tough for the public to see, tough for our team to see. We were successfully able to get her out of there. But it was determined, in consultation with our vet, that we weren't going to attempt another refloat. So we pulled her off, out of the rocky crevice so that she wasn't thrashing around. They were barnacle covered rocks. So she did sustain some superficial injuries that were bleeding. But then the vet was on her way. We got her out of the rocks, down onto the soft sand, just kind of moved back to let her be, with the plan to humanely euthanize. But she did end up passing on her own.
Yeah. And, it's a sad story, but I think one of the biggest takeaways from this story is that, if you ever see one of these animals on the beach, the best thing that you can do is call our hotline and get our team down there, because we have the resources. We know who to speak with, the experts on these animals that we are consulting with, our veterinarian, our partners. And so we will be able to figure out the best course of action for this animal. And
we did get that animal in for a full postmortem exam. We partner with the lab at UNH, New Hampshire Veterinary Diagnostics Laboratory. And they were able to find that, externally she did look great. But internally she did have pneumonia. And then when they looked at the brain, once it was fixed in formalin, a few days after the necropsy, they looked at the brain and they actually found parasitic tracks through the brain tissue.
Yeah.
So she had some pretty extensive, even though externally she was acting normal, internally it made it very clear that it was the right decision, that we weren't going to try to release her again.
Exactly. And no, and that's, I think that's a very crucial story to share from our work. But we're going to switch over now from the depressing to a big success story that we did also have way earlier in the year, and a lot of people probably heard about. I'm going to play a video here that explains it a little bit, but our team was able to actually successfully respond to this animal in 2020, which was named number 87. And this harbor seal was brought up to Marine Mammals of Maine for rehab, and actually was the first harbor seal we've ever been able to satellite tag, to be able to track this animal and contribute to very important scientific research going on to study these species and where they spend their time, how big is their habitat, is that seal that you see in Maine the same exact animal that you might see in New York? And the answers were astounding. I mean, we learned a lot from this animal over the year. It traveled all the way down immediately, like within a week, from Portland, Maine, basically around Portland, Maine, all the way south to off of Nantucket and back. So these animals travel vast distances. We were able to learn a ton, contribute to scientific research. What you're seeing here is you saw the response. You saw now these. This is essentially one of our partner organizations, AMCs in New York. Sorry, I almost forgot their name for a second there. But they helped us apply this tag. We all work super closely together to make this happen. And that's what you're essentially seeing here. Ashley, I know that we also have big plans for 2022 related to seal tagging, if you want to hint at that a little bit.
Sure. So that was kind of a pilot project for us, or the first time we've ever done it or had it done. So Brian mentioned that it was in conjunction with not only Marine Mammals of Maine, who rehabilitated this animal, but also Atlantic Marine Conservation Society, or AMCs. Rob traveled up from New York to help us tag this animal. So we'll be working closely moving forward in the future, because we hope to satellite tag at least 1 or 2 animals per year moving forward, so that we can start to uncover or do our part in helping to uncover some of these questions about these animals. So you may think, seals are around, we know about their species, a little bit about their biology, but the realistic side of it is that these are animals that live most of their life in the water. So it makes them really hard to study, in a wild setting. So we can learn a lot from these animals that are rehabilitated and then released. We do hind flipper tag these animals. So whether it's just we relocate them to another location or they do go into rehabilitation, they'll then do a hind flipper tag. But those are not real-time tags. Those are simply if the animal shows up somewhere else and can read the number on the tag and the color, we can track that animal back. But a satellite tag gives us real-time data for where the animal is, what kinds of temperatures they're hanging out in. So you will see us tagging more animals in the future.
Yeah, and that's super exciting stuff. That's real scientific data that we are helping with, and super cool. And we'll be sharing a lot of those maps are on our website, so you can check those out. And I have one more very exciting story for you before we round up and finish off our live stream here of our 2021 recap. This year, we've actually developed a new way for you to help protect these animals. So I'm gonna pull this up here for you. We've actually developed with the help of one of our interns, Taylor, we've developed a resource for dog owners in our region. So we developed a map of dog-friendly beaches in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and this is available on our website currently. It's live, and it's just a resource for dog owners to know before you go to the beach. So in nearly, I mean, Ashley, am I correct in saying this? In nearly every response that we go to, in some way or shape or form, we end up encountering dogs and their owners on the beach. I'd say so.
Yeah, I'd say human interactions. There's a lot of our beaches that dogs aren't allowed in the summer.
Yes.
So as long as people are following the rules,
yes,
we should be able to limit. But this resource does just that. It lets you know. Personally, I love bringing my dog to the beach, but this resource helps you know, given any time of the year, where can I bring my dog to the beach to enjoy?
Yep,
and what to do if we see a seal, how to properly react to
exactly.
that.
And the biggest takeaway that we hope people take from this resource is if you are a dog owner and you do see a wild animal on the beach, whether it's a seal or any other kind of species that's resting on the beach, if you keep your dog leashed and just keep at a distance, we do have plenty of stories, where people keep their dogs leashed as they're right near the seal, and then as soon as they walk by, their dog, maybe it's a hound, maybe it's one of those dogs with a good sense of smell, but they smell that animal on the beach and they turn right around and come back. And so really the biggest takeaway that we hope people get from that resource is to just keep their distance and be respectful of the space of other wild animals on the beach. It protects not only these animals from dogs, but it also protects your dog and your pet. Seals, as you've seen in a lot of the videos we played, seals can be very aggressive. We use lots of personal protection equipment when we're handling these animals. And so, we want to make sure people are being respectful and safe out there.
There are also diseases that are transferable between seals, dogs, humans, all around. So we try to be cautious of that and let them be wild animals.
Exactly. And that resource is live on our site. Feel free to share with your friends, family. The more people who know, the better, really is what it comes down to. And yeah, I just want to round things out here. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Again, Ashley and Brian from the Seacoast Science Center Marine Mammal Rescue Team. And I just want to thank you all one more time for helping us raise. We're pretty close to $8,000 at this point. We still have 64 donors who have helped us to reach that end goal tonight. We're hoping to get to 130 different community donors that are helping support our work. Representing those 130 different animals that we've responded to this year. You've got a taste of those animals tonight. I mean, not literally, but just figuratively. You've gotten to see dive into the work that we do, and that's just a snapshot of what our year looks like. We do a lot out there. We're $2,100 away from reaching our goal of $10,000 raised in support, and every bit of it goes right to the work that we do on our beaches. Ashley, is there anything else you want to say?
And every dollar counts. I know Giving Tuesday, especially, you're getting hit from all these different angles, but the dollars add up. Even if you get a handful of $5 donations, they're just as important as those bigger donations.
Yeah.
So we thank you all that have already donated, and to those of you that may donate after we finish this live stream. Thank you tremendously.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you out on the beach. If you ever see us, never hesitate to say hello. Now you know what we look like out there. And so, yeah, we might just run into you on our local beach out here. Thank you so much for tuning in.